So, something else we believe is true is when your amygdala is on, you save memory, you save information in a completely different location in your brain than you do when it's off. So, hopefully, this morning, when everybody was, getting up and stretching and getting out of bed and having their breakfast, their amygdala hopefully was not on. So, they were sitting eating whatever it is they eat for breakfast, and that information is stored in one part of their brain. Well, if they are afraid, if they are upset, if their fight, flight, freeze, or fawn is on, then that memory of what they had for breakfast is going to get stored in a completely different place.
So, Nicole, we're going to just dive straight in. So for people who know and love you, they are very lucky. They get to know exactly who you are and what you do. So I always like to start off to inform people who don't know you. What makes you you, and what amazing things do you bring to the world?
Well, so I think that I'm not just what I do for a living. I adore my dog who's in the next room snoring. So hopefully you can't hear him. Or maybe it's sad if you can't. I'm very close to oh, he just walked into the room. Very close to a lot of my family. I bought a fixer-upper a couple of years ago, and I'm kind of slowly trying to buff up the house and make it nice. It's got a new roof and new plumbing and electrical and all that jazz. Curious. I read a lot and I work out, probably not enough, but I do it. I like to bake. And I'm a therapist.
That's awesome. And I know you help so many people
So
with what you do, which I think is awesome. So we on the show, I love to get into trauma and how that affects one's life.
yeah.
So what do you see are the biggest patterns when people are suffering from trauma and they are struggling to get over it or to get out of that? I feel for me, when I was experiencing it, I just felt completely trapped by it and I didn't know really where to turn. So how do you see that playing out in people's lives?
I see a few different things. So one thing that I see a lot is people blaming themselves, maybe not so much for the trauma, but for the things that they're struggling with, whether it's addiction or trouble with relationships or sleeping. A lot of times people just tell themselves the story that it's because they are a failure or they're inadequate in some way, instead of understanding that they learned a lot of unhealthy patterns and their brain, their subconscious, their body, all of the above, have come up with ways to protect them. And so it's not so much that there's something wrong with them. It's just that they haven't learned a more adaptive way to move through the world. And a lot of times people just blame themselves for things not going the way they want it to. I see that a lot.
And how do people get over that? Or can you even get over blaming yourself?
You can. So we know from research that there is a difference in child onset trauma and adult onset trauma. Adult onset trauma, meaning somebody who had healthy, loving, adaptive, I don't like to use the word normal, but adaptive childhood where they had all the supports and stuff that they needed, and they experienced their trauma as an adult. What we have found is that the road to peace is an easier, steadier, more linear road. However, when people have experienced trauma as children, they have, I like to kind of talk about sort of stuff being like hardware versus software, right? Our software might be let's say you didn't learn how to drive till you're in your 20s, a skill, right? Your job, I didn't learn my job until I was a fully grown adult. Makes sense. So it's more software, right? Hardware is stuff that's hardwired into your physiology, into your brain, into your body. And that stuff happens when you're a child. And so when you're experiencing trauma, when your hardware is getting built, it's not that you can't heal. It's not that you can't recover. Of course you can, but it's trickier. And you're far more likely to experience a form of relapse when you experience stress. And so a big part of recovery for people that have specifically child onset trauma is being able to understand that your body likes homeostasis. Your hardware likes homeostasis. So recovery is going to look a little bit more like a stair step. And sometimes you're going to fall down the stairs. And now that you've learned those steps, you have to kind of practice walking back up those steps. And so that doesn't mean you didn't do it right. That doesn't mean that it didn't work. Doesn't mean that you're flawed and you're not working hard enough. I hear that a lot too. Why am I not at the top of the staircase yet? It's not like that. So a lot of self-compassion, a lot of mindfulness, a lot of understanding that I might not be where I want to be, but there's a really good chance that I'm better than I was when I started.
So when your body likes homeostasis, does that mean that if you have experienced trauma or stress, whether a child or an adult, that is now your new homeostasis and you have to unlearn that to create a new one? Or is homeostasis the same for everybody? And then you get like stuck into these little patterns and places, if I'm making sense.
I think so. So nature likes homeostasis. Plants like it. Nature likes it. So our bodies like homeostasis too. Our bodies like, and our brains do too, what they're used to. And so it takes something, good or bad, right? But it takes something to move us into a new homeostasis. Now, that something could be adaptive, like meditation, right? A person might learn to deal with their anxiety with meditation. Somebody else might learn to deal with their anxiety by taking drugs. That's not as healthy, right? So our bodies are constantly looking for homeostasis. So when you experience a trauma, and it's going to hit everybody differently, your personal homeostasis might look different than someone else's, but once you come into a new homeostasis, it's going to take something else to put you into a new one, hopefully a more adaptive one. I hope I answered your question.
You have answered my questions. If I'm going to use it not as complex as trauma, but if you have, which is also paralyzing and terrible for people, I know, if you have anxiety, before you learn these adaptive things like mindfulness and things like that, is your homeostasis that anxious state?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's great. You have to give yourself a new feeling of homeostasis in order to heal the past one, the one that's not serving you. Am I understanding this correctly?
Yes. And it's got to feel, you've got to practice it and practice it and practice it. So it's not going to feel natural for a very long time. I'll just keep using mindfulness or meditation rather as the example.
Yeah.
It's not. So what we know about change, like the golden rule of change, is that it's really, really hard. So a lot of times when people are struggling with a change, there's a couple of reasons why, right? One is the change is hard, period. Two is because it doesn't feel authentic to them. And so a lot of times when I'm working with a new client, I'll suggest a couple of different things. And maybe not we try a couple of different things all at once, but maybe I suggest mindfulness, specifically meditation. And some people love it and they fall into it. And it's an easier habit to start because they start to feel better quickly. Other people, it feels too jarring to their system to sit and be quiet and just breathe. That can be too much. If you go from, imagine the inside of you is like a constantly shaking maraca, and then I just ask you to sit and breathe, that could be too much too fast, right? But if I said, you know what, instead of just sitting and listening to your breath, what if I instead asked you to go outside and just walk around the block, no headphones? That's sort of an in-between. I would say that's more of a stair step. That's still a mindfulness experience, right? No headphones, no sound, no phone, hopefully, if that's safe. And just go outside and look around. Notice what you see. Notice what you hear. That's still a mindfulness exercise. So I'm still slowing down your nervous system. I'm still getting you to be in a mindfulness practice without asking you to completely stop shaking and suddenly stop shaking those maracas. I don't know if that makes sense. So that's a practice. The better that feels, the more likely you are to repeat that.
Okay. And so do you believe that mindfulness is a key to healing trauma?
Yes.
Do you think that's one of the key components?
Absolutely. Yes. I'm certified in EMDR, and a lot of that experience when you're doing, whether it's EMDR or exposure therapy, a lot of it is connecting what your story is, what your thoughts are, to what's happening in your body in that moment. And that is absolutely a big part of mindfulness.
So I love EMDR. I want to dive into that a little bit because so impactful on my journey. I mean, things came up in EMDR that I didn't even know were affecting me. So can you explain for people who don't know how that works?
Gosh. Okay. So, your amygdala in somebody who's healthy and doesn't have trauma is about the size and shape of an almond. And your amygdala is in the crown of your head. And what we think happens, not a lot of people will let us slice their brains open when they're in the middle of a traumatic experience. So we don't know this for sure. But what we think happens is when your amygdala turns on, that's when your fight, flight, freeze, or fawn kicks in. We think it actually swells. We think it actually gets bigger. And for folks that have PTSD, what we think happens is theirs gets bigger and stays bigger. Again, not a lot of people will let us slice open their brains when they're still alive for good reason. So why is that important? Well, just like everything else, right? Location, location, location. Your amygdala, like I said, is in the crown of your head, and it has a direct line to your prefrontal cortex, which I affectionately refer to as the govna. Your prefrontal cortex is the last part of your hardware, your brain, to develop, and your prefrontal cortex is responsible for understanding the consequences of the behavior. So if right now I belched really loudly, I can imagine in my prefrontal cortex that some people would not be super into listening to a big, loud belch. That might not feel good to people. So maybe I shouldn't do that. That might be a bad idea. So my amygdala can turn off. When my amygdala is on, it has the ability to turn off my prefrontal cortex. So I can't rationally, methodically think through and plan what I'm going to do next. The other thing, or one of the other things it can do, is it has a direct line to my primitive brain. So people like to call that the monkey brain, the lizard brain. There's a lot of cutesy words for it. But what that means is my amygdala can control my heart rate, my blood pressure, my body temperature, where I'm sweating. I don't know about your listeners, but I for sure sweat different when I'm stressed than when I'm just hot. It can impact your ability to listen and take in information. It can also contract your field of vision so that you can't fully see, like you're in your periphery. So it does all of this stuff. So your amygdala is a big deal. And I understand that I'm kind of droning on a little bit about sort of the anatomy of your brain, but it doesn't really make sense to talk about EMDR without talking a little bit without talking a little bit about what's happening in your brain. So your amygdala is a big deal. And when your amygdala is on, it is in control, right? Like I said, so you're not thinking thoroughly. But something else that we have found, or that we believe is true, we can't completely prove it because, again, slicing people's brains open while they're alive is not sort of frowned upon. So something else we believe is true is when your amygdala is on, you save memory, you save information in a completely different location in your brain than you do when it's off. So hopefully this morning when everybody was, getting up and stretching and getting out of bed and having their breakfast, their amygdala hopefully was not on. And so they were sitting eating whatever it is they eat for breakfast. And that information is stored in one part of their brain. Well, if they are afraid, if they are upset, if their fight, flight, freeze, or fawn is on, then that memory of what they had for breakfast is going to get stored in a completely different place. So what we believe is happening with EMDR is that And when we do EMDR, when we resave it in that sort of everyday memory storage site, we pair it with a positive, or for some people, sometimes it needs to be honestly sort of more of a neutral cognition, like I'm safe in this moment. Not everybody can say I'm safe, right? For some people, that doesn't feel true. And so when you're doing EMDR, you've got to find a cognition that feels true to you when you're working on that resaving, restorage. And we do that with bilateral stimulation, which basically is simultaneous or alternatively simulating both hemispheres of the brain. And there's a lot of different ways to do that.
So I know because I've experienced it, it's kind of like, I'm not sure because that's just my imagination. Is it kind of inducing like a REM sleep experience so that if you're not doing EMDR, does your brain, I'm just trying to make this correlation and it might not be real, when your everyday EMDR experience is you sleeping, or am I got this wrong? So if you have an experience that you store in the wrong memory bank, when you're sleeping, are you able to process that and take it out? Or do you have to do EMDR to do that?
So sort of, kind of, not really. REM sleep, so rapid eye movement sleep, and EMDR are very similarly related. I don't want to say they're the same thing, but they're very similarly related. What REM sleep can do for us, while sleep is really powerful and sleep is really important to any sort of recovery, whether that's from a trauma or from a vigorous workout or whatever, right? Sleep is really important and can restore a lot. REM sleep has not been found to be able to untraumatize someone or to heal trauma unto itself. When we are awake and we are moving through the world, there's way more stimuli than we could ever take in or process just because we can't. You've got to kind of prioritize, like, let's say you're driving, right? You can't notice the exact make, model, color, and a brief description of every single driver and hold that in your brain through the entire drive. It's not possible. But your brain is still taking in that stimulation constantly. So part of what rapid eye movement does for you at night, when you do get good sleep, it helps your brain kind of sort, process, let go. Hey, that white car, it had blue writing on it. I don't need to hold on to that anymore. Discard, or a whole lot of other things. Good sleep can help our brains kind of filter through and let go of a lot of data that we just don't need, like superfluous, not important data. So they're similar, but they're not quite the same thing. So let's say if I walked outside today and saw something absolutely horrific that was traumatizing to me, getting a good night's sleep wouldn't necessarily heal that trauma.
So what are some things that people can do to heal the trauma? Actually, before we do that, before we get into that, I want to ask, so if you see something that's traumatizing, how does it affect everybody differently? And does it affect you based on your past traumas? It's a kind of a two-part question.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So both cut to both. So kind of going back to like adult onset versus childhood onset. If you have a childhood where you have supportive caregivers and you've learned a lot of healthy coping skills, then you're far less likely to become traumatized as an adult. And then when you do become traumatized as an adult, it's far easier for you to recover from that. Yes, and we can point to a lot of different research about this, including one of, I don't want to say my favorite because it's a weird turn of phrase here, but probably one of the most compelling longitudinal studies on this was the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study done in the 90s. And what we found was when you are a child, if you have a certain number of adverse experiences, you are far more likely as an adult to have mental health problems, drug addiction, and physical problems. So not just mental health or behavioral health, you're also far more likely to have a higher occurrence of stroke, heart disease, cancer, IBS, a host of other physical issues. So yes, if you have a history of trauma, it is easier to be traumatized.
So if I want to go into that ACE study because I find that so fascinating as well. But for our listeners, if you have a high score on the ACE, or even if you have it, because I think it's if you have like if you have two experiences from the ACE score, you're more likely. Is that correct? Or is it?
Oh, goodness.
It's as little as 2. I can't remember, but maybe
I'll put that in the show notes. It was a little bit higher than that. Yeah, I thought it was a little bit higher than that, but
okay.
I think it's surprisingly low. I'll say that. It's surprisingly low. So, for example, you could grow up in a loving, healthy home, but if one of your parents dies before you reach 18, like that's going to be a big one. And that's far more likely to cause the death by itself is upsetting and traumatic, but it's far more likely to cause a cascade event like insecurity around money. All of a sudden, maybe your primary caregiver now has to go back to work. And so now you're in daycare and you're not with your primary caregiver as often. And that's really hard, right? That's really jarring to a kid. So it usually causes a cascade event like that.
Okay. So if you have a score that's going to impact your adult life on the ACE test, are there things that you can do pretty early on? Like if, let's say you have somebody come into your life when you're like 16 or 17 and realizes that you have this score that's going to impact you. Are you able to rectify it and change the trajectory? Or is it something you stuck with, and no matter what you do, you're at a higher risk of having heart disease and stroke and diabetes and all the things that they list?
You can absolutely change the trajectory. I think you have to want to change it though. So use the example of, let's pretend I meet a 16-year-old today who would have had a higher or an elevated ACEs score. If I meet a 16-year-old today who says, yeah, these things happen to me, but I don't care, I'm going to do what I want to do, which 16-year-olds can sometimes be apt to do, there's only so much that anybody can do for that individual, right? But if that same 16-year-old says, I don't want to feel this way, I will read every book, I will listen to the podcasts, I will go for the walks, I will sit and I will meditate. Which yoga class do I take? Totally, that person can change the trajectory of their lives. But I would say that about anybody. One of my favorite clinicians, researchers, and teachers, Carl Rogers, used to say, and I'm paraphrasing, but he would basically say that people don't change unless they can't not change. Meaning that whatever's going on with them has to be so acute and so irritating and so frustrating that they can't not take action. Again, whether that's healthy or unhealthy, they've got to do something. And so for a lot of people, if it's something small, like I don't sleep well. And now for me, that would be huge. I need sleep. I'm a monster if I don't sleep right. But if that, if you have kind of just decided that that's okay and you kind of scrape through, it's going to take a lot longer for that sleep deprivation to catch up to you and for it to be a problem big enough for you to take action.
Okay, so even as, I just want to clarify here, so even as an adult, you could take action and you can change that.
Absolutely, yes.
You can change, okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, I believe that. I just want to clarify this for everybody else who's listening, that no matter where you are,
no matter where you are. Yeah. Whether you're 9 or you're 90, you can change. Absolutely.
So what are some things that people can do? Like if they say, okay, they're completely inspired by listening to you, what are actions that they could take right now to start their journey or to improve the strides that they've made?
I think that everybody's pain points are different and everybody's skill set is different. So that's hard for me to kind of just totally blank slate. One thing that I think especially right now, I think that we need fewer screens. And I say that knowing the full irony of what I'm doing right now where I'm looking at a screen. But I think that all of us need to try to have intentional time every day where we are not being stimulated by something, right? Even if it's, I'm going to sit for 30 minutes and just eat my food, right? I'm not suggesting you need to just sit in a room and stare at a wall. I'm not saying that, but go for a walk with no headphones and just notice what you hear, see, smell. Sit and have your dinner with no music, no podcast, no TV, no screen, no doom scrolling. Just give yourself these pockets of time where you're not avoiding all of your thoughts, avoiding all of your feelings. I know I said it earlier, I'm a huge proponent for mindfulness, which is what I just described, but I think meditation, if you haven't meditated before, that's totally fine. Start with 2 minutes and you don't need a fancy app, but there's tons of free meditations on YouTube, or you can set a timer on your phone for 2 minutes and just sit and breathe. It's not magic. You just sit and breathe. You're not going to be teleported to another reality. You just sit with yourself and let whatever comes up come up. I'm a huge fan of journaling. I know not everybody loves it. And there's a lot of people that feel like they don't have the privacy for journaling, which I totally respect. But I think journaling can be good, even if you write something down and if you feel like you don't have the privacy to keep it, throw it away, shred it. But the catharsis, and we actually stimulate a different part of our brain. Most of us, we just click at our phones or we type on our computers. Very few of us actually sit and put pen to paper. And it actually stimulates a different part of our brain when we write something out. It's totally okay if it's hyperbolic. It's totally okay if you're just writing a story. And to say, I'm writing that, or to give yourself permission to write it and let it out. And in this safe way where it's not about being judged. It's not even about being accurate. Just let it out. And then it's done, right? And let it be over. I think those are a lot of like really simple, free things that people can do. I also really, really like specifically Kundalini yoga, because Kundalini yoga is about moving an energy and stress hormones out of your body using small movements and little breaths. That, again, there's some really great free resources on YouTube. So I like, free is usually in the budget. I usually like to start people with really, really simple stuff like that. But again, without kind of knowing where somebody is more specifically, I think those are like a handful of things I would encourage somebody to do today.
Those are great. I know I avoid journaling. I know I should do it and always avoid it.
That's okay.
Like, seriously need to get it.
I think a lot of people avoid it though. And I'm wondering, do you know why you avoid it?
I think it's part of that cycle of like avoiding the emotion.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say that's probably my reason. I'm like, it feels so heavy to me.
Yeah.
And I know for me, it's like a key factor in my process. And I acknowledge that, but I still don't do it. So I'm kind of feel like I'm not progressing as much as I should.
So something we talked about at the beginning was like that self-judgment, right? Like, I'm not doing it as quickly as I should. I'm not doing it the right way. And sometimes we're not ready. Like maybe you're carrying it around for a minute because you're not ready to let it go, whatever it is, right? And so I think a lot of people avoid journaling for the exact same reason you avoid journaling. Like, I don't know what's going to happen if I let this feeling go. What's going to happen to me? And that's a big part of trauma recovery. I encourage people to consider that their trauma response is like a suit of armor. Think about medieval knights in shining armor, right? The really successful knights had these really elaborate, intricate, ornate suits of armor. And imagine that if you are a traumatized person, the more trauma, the more hard stuff you've gone through, the more intricate that armor is. And it does not feel good to take it off because it feels so safe to wear it. And so instead of judging that, right, being proud of like, hey, this suit has kept me safe. This suit comforts me. And even though it's really hard to move around in, and I don't always want to wear it, I've earned it. It's mine. And like, changing that relationship and being proud of the work that you've done to keep yourself safe and to keep yourself together. That's what that armor's done for you. It's really hard to take it off. And there's nothing wrong with that. It was put there for a reason.
That is such a beautiful way. I actually made a note of that. I love that.
Good.
Such a beautiful way of looking at it. But I also know at the times over the years when I have actually dove into journaling and I've done it consistently, I have had like massive breakthroughs and great transformation. So I know it's a thing that should that needs to be done. But yeah, we'll get there.
You'll do it when you're ready.
You've inspired me today.
Okay, you'll do it when you're ready, right? So again, like that self-judgment, that self-criticism, like be proud of that armor. You freaking earned it, lady. Like, and it's okay if it's hard to take off. It's stiff for a reason.
So you don't have to get into the details of it, but I always like to find out because when I first started doing this, I was so pleasantly surprised. Well, not pleasantly because it's not a thing that you wish upon anybody, but I was very surprised that people got into this because they had experienced something in their past that had led them to help people.
Yeah.
What the show is about is giving people the hope that it's possible. So having people who are, successful and living a successful life, whatever that success means for them, functioning daily and feeling joy and doing all of these things. I love that as an example. So was there something in your past that inspired you to become a therapist?
Yeah. So There's a cliche that a lot of therapists will, or anybody in behavioral health will joke about, that we became, or we got involved in this field either because we're a little off or we were raised by people that were, which isn't always and it's not a nice joke, but there it is. I had a biological father who, when he would have a bad day, would come and take it out on my mother and I, put her in the hospital, some fun stuff like that.
So sorry.
And my mother has had some struggles with depression and that kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, I think my path was not initially to be a therapist. What's funny is my favorite grandfather was a judge. And so I grew up thinking that lawyers tell people. And so I had wanted to be a family law attorney, and I really wanted to get into politics. I thought that that's how I would save sort of the next generation of kids growing up in tumultuous households like that. Long story short, I went a different route. And so, yeah, I mean, I definitely have my own, it's weird to call it that, but yes, I do have my own trauma for sure.
Oh, thank you for sharing, because I feel it's important for people to see you are living a successful life and you are helping people, and you had an experience in your past and you were able to overcome it. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, it's not a question I get asked often. I would say too, it's interesting to imagine like overcoming, right? Like I think kind of like my armor, right? You have armor, I have armor. I don't think about, even when I put it down, I don't imagine that my armor is totally gone. I imagine that my armor stays with me because it's still part of my history. It's part of what happened. And so this idea of, and I think everybody has a different relationship with this, but the story that I tell myself is that those things happen and, right? Those things happened and I have a life that I am proud of. So two things can be true at the same time.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Is there anything, as we get closer to the end here, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you wish I did?
Gosh.
Or anything that you want to share?
Gosh, that's such a good question. You completely stumped me. I think that for a lot of folks that are nervous about starting counseling or therapy, something I like to encourage people to do, if you've never done it before, you don't have to work with the first person you meet or that you call or that responds to you. I'm a big advocate for, look, I only have so many gifts, right? I am not a bad person, but I'm not perfect. And so I'm not for everybody. And that's okay. That doesn't make me a bad therapist. Also, there could come a time where after I've worked with somebody for a while where they have gotten all the gifts that I have to give and they want to work on something else. And that doesn't mean they hate me. And that doesn't mean that I'm bad. And it doesn't mean that they're rejecting all the good stuff we did together. And so I think it's important for people to have permission to follow their instincts. If they feel safe with somebody, great, work with that person. If you feel like, hey, this person gave me a lot, but I want something else now, great, listen to that. There's nothing wrong with that. I think too, if there was just one thing that I could have, that I could kind of whisper in the ear of people that are hurting, is that like it won't always feel this way. You can keep making new choices. It won't always feel this way.
That's beautiful. Nicole, thank you so much for being with us here today. And if people want to work with you, where can they find you?
My websites are really easy, Nicole Richardson.com. And thank you so much for having me. This was fun. And you stumped me with that last one. That was a good question.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and stay tuned for the next time. Let your healing begin.